Sure, thank you. So this is joint work with my other statistical colleagues, Taya and Nicole. And the obvious conflict of interest is that we're all statisticians. We're all members of the Stats Society of Australia. The Stats Society, we're not involved in this. So you could say that what I'm going to say is, well, of course, Adrian's going to say that because he's a statistician. Everybody thinks their own job is more important than it is. Who could forget during the pandemic when estate agents tried to get themselves put on the privilege lists on a par with nurses and doctors? But, you know, as my other colleague says, medical statisticians have all taken a massive pay cut to be here. We could actually all be earning 3-4 times the amount at a drug company or in finance. So I'm here, and what I'm going to say is I'm not trying to drum up business for myself. I've got plenty of work. I'm actually just really concerned about the way statistics are being used in health and medical research. Because what's going on? Because statistics are being really badly practiced. So this is one graph that still shocks me. So we, myself and Jonathan Wren, a colleague in the US, automatically downloaded about 1 million confidence intervals from PubMed. So this is a representative data set of what people are reading on PubMed, which is one of our most important evidence bases. We turned that into a Z value and into a P value. And actually, we shared our data. We didn't make this graph. Our colleague, Eric van Zwet in the Netherlands made this graph. So it's a good advert for data sharing because I think this graph is a lot better than the ones we did. Anyway, what have we got down the bottom? We've got the Z value here that shows, you know, the strength of the effects, and then you can map that to a P value. And you can see when the P value, either on the positive or the negative side, flips from just above 0.05 to just below 0.05, we get this absolutely enormous increase in statistically significant results. And similarly, we have this massive gap here in non-significant results. So somebody has driven a bus through the evidence here, and it is a very sharp-sided bus because the gap here is just not believable. So this tells me that people do not understand what a p-value is, and I will often ask people just out of the blue if they start going on about p-values, what is a p-value? And I very, very rarely get the correct definition, and we kind of laugh and move on. But I think it's kind of amazing that something so basic that I can teach people in half an hour. By the way, nobody wants to come to my stats courses. I've had to repeatedly cancel them, but then they still send me these terrible papers with p-values everywhere. That people are sacrificing understanding for journals. You got to get a good p-value to get it into a journal, and people are sacrificing the truth. And what this means is there is a massive deficit in the things that do not work. They are not getting published. And then we also have the things that are getting published drastically over-egged. And we've got a false impression of how good things are. And this is terrible for the evidence base, and this is absolutely abysmal for evidence-based medicine. And as the late great statistician Doug Altman says, bad statistics makes bad research may lead to bad medicine, and bad medicine may cost lives. This image of what's significant and not, and the estimates behind it is a really shocking, it should be a shocking wake-up call for health and medical research, because how can we trust any systematic reviews or anything we see when we have such clear biases in the results that people are presenting? Should statistics get involved in the ethical process? Well, the national statement says the research that has merit is designed or developed using methods appropriate for achieving the aims of the proposal. That seems clear to me, that statistics does have a place, and good study design does have a place, but as we'll see later, other people disagree. And then before we completed this project, after we completed this project, I'm sure you've all seen recently, the Declaration of Helsinki was updated to say that medical research involving human participants must have a scientifically sound and rigorous design and execution that are likely to produce reliable and valuable knowledge and avoid research waste. And myself and my colleagues are really happy to see this statement, because the issue of research waste has been going on for decades now, for longer than decades, but it's been well established in the literature for decades. And I know some people really hate the word research waste, but I honestly don't know what else you can call it. So very happy to see this, and it'll be interesting to see how it changed. Now, this happened after we did our census, so we don't know how the ethics committees are going to react to that change. What did we do? We did a census. I tried to capture all human research committees in Australia registered with the NHMRC. We didn't do the animal committees. We focused on quantitative data and or analysis, not qualitative research. I acknowledge that qualitative research is a really important and valuable type of research, but we're just quantity people. We sent out an online questionnaire and we published our protocol on the Open Science Framework, and I can send you the protocol on all my slides. It's all openly available. We only got 50% of HRECs in the end. Started out with the 194 registered on the NHMRC. It's funny, 21% of the link, so that each HREC has a link, 21% of the time the link from the National Health and Medical Research Council registration did not resolve to the HREC page. A lot of HRECs, I found it very hard to find anything out about them. And some of the information I did find, people would email me and say, I'm no longer the chair, I left like 5 years ago. So there's some really weird and outdated information on there. Also, some HRECs, I mean, I was ignorant of this, but some HRECs seem very small and very odd. It seemed weird, and some of them, yeah, phoning them, they didn't even seem to know that they were a HREC as well. So that was odd. So I managed to find emails for 187. Quite a few people opened the first page, and then a whole lot of people didn't progress beyond the first page. Obviously, our PICF was a bit intimidating, but I recognise there's maybe some bias in there that people who didn't want to engage with this study or didn't have a statistician or didn't know what I was talking about. So there's probably some bias that we've got more engaged people. 121 started the questions, and then a whole load just flicked through the questionnaire and didn't actually provide any answers as well. And then one was an ex-chair. Most of them were done online. I did do 2 over the phone, and that was quite funny because I said, okay, now I'm going to read you the PICF, and both HREC chairs said, oh, please, no, don't do that. No need. So I did find that amusing. Anyway, we've got 93 answers, 50%. So the main question here, do you have a statistician as a full committee member? A third said yes, the majority saying no, 11% didn't answer. And then we did understand that you don't have to have a statistician on the committee. As we've seen earlier, you can have these separate review committees beforehand. So about 35% of people said that they didn't have a non-member on the committee, but they did have somebody who could be consulted on statistical issues. If you look at if you combine the 2 no's, there's about 31% of committees that don't have sort of any statistical coverage, either as a full member or a non-member who can be consulted. So of the people who said they had a statistician, we asked what the statistician's qualifications were. 35% was PhD, which is great. The next most common answer was don't know, which I kind of find strange. So it never came up in conversation, or their qualifications have never been checked, or they're not easily available. Quite a lot that said other. When we looked through these others, I think there was only one or maybe even none on this where it was actually statistical qualifications. And I'll talk about that again a bit later. And only 6% answered that they had no formal qualifications, but as we'll see, I think that percentage actually should be higher. Most of them were currently employed full-time as a statistician. There's still a fair amount that were no, did get some retired ones. Quite a few that were other, and once again in this other, there was only one that actually seemed to be a statistician. The others were actually employed not as a statistician, clearly in other areas. If you don't have a statistician as a full member on the committee, we ask people how issues are dealt with. And this worries me a bit. We've got 33% of committees without a statistician dealing with statistical issues within committees. So that's without what we think is the required expertise. And then you can see that others are required to consult a statistician beforehand, which is fine. And there's an expectation that they get reviewed elsewhere or by a review subcommittee, which is of course fine as long as there's qualified statisticians there. And then while they don't have a statistician, a lot of people believe that statistical questions can be covered by other members, which I'm not convinced is true. Some of them do have access elsewhere. And what surprised me here is only 11% said they can't recruit one, because beforehand we did, there is a national shortage of statisticians. There's an international shortage of statisticians. So we thought that maybe the ability not to recruit one might be a much higher issue, but actually I think the highest issue we're seeing is that people think that they can just do it themselves, and some even explicitly saying you don't need a statistician. So when we combine, we estimated the number of applications people look at and whether they have what we would say sufficient statistical expertise, which is a statistician either as a full member or who can be consulted and does actually have qualifications in statistics, then actually at the moment we think that there are more applications, about 6,200 applications per year that have got some quantitative data and or analysis that aren't getting any sort of sufficient statistical scrutiny, and sort of only 5,000 that are, and then a whole other quite a big bunch where we actually can't tell, given other people's answers and missing data, whether there's sufficient scrutiny or not. Had some nice quotes, very much on the positive and very much on the negative. And I think, something I should have highlighted from my results before is there is a real clear big variance in practice here. We did see some committees that were, talked about the access they had, talked about how important it was, and then a whole bunch of others that didn't or claimed they had statistical advice when they didn't. So statisticians on HRECs needed, absolutely should be mandatory. I found the statistician's advice to be at all times valuable. I think it would be difficult to perform sound scientific review without biased statistical expertise. On the other side, we had, in my view, it's the researcher's responsibility to demonstrate in their ethics application that they have or have sought the required expertise. So here's somebody who doesn't think that the ethics committee need to look at study design and statistical design. And then this is a variation of a quote we got quite a lot. Most medical practitioners are very good with stats. They're qualified, but would not necessarily be classified as a qualified statistician. And this happened a lot with either psychologists, clinicians, or epidemiologists. And this does worry me because, if I started calling myself a qualified psychologist, there would be issues and I would harm people. But somebody who's got sort of a little statistical training, therefore feels able to and competent to comment on all sorts of statistical designs. And I would tell you that statistics is a very difficult subject. I've been in it for 25 years and I'm still learning things. One of the most amusing quotes from a colleague in a separate project was that, they said that they had a colleague, when they were asked about their statistical expertise, they said, oh, they shared an office with a statistician for 4 years. So it's kind of like statistics is something you can absorb by osmosis, and you don't actually need any formal training in it. And it is a bit, I do find it quite shocking, really, that people will call themselves a statistician without any formal training. And some of the other quotes we had were things like, oh, well, they did a PhD that was very statsy. It's like, well, okay, but one area of statistics does not give you the ability to comment on all statistics. And I say that a broad range of study designs and looking at a broad range of practice and a broad range of experience is really key at this stage, because I think ethics is a key place where we could actually reduce some of this research waste. What are the practical strategies? Should ethics committees cover study design? Maybe we could have a national debate on that and get this interpretation of the national statement hammered out, because at the moment there clearly is a really big variation in how that wording is interpreted. And maybe even each committee should post a public statement to say, okay, well, this is the way we're interpreting it. We will look at your design, and other committees to say no, to be completely transparent about what the expectations are. Because I think the expectations of the community I talk to is that ethics will look at this. So they might not feel that, and institutions might not feel they have to set up these separate review panels because it's the ethics job. So if everybody thinks it's everybody else's job, then nobody's going to do it. This is not our recommendation, but this is from a study from Peroska et al. That looked at randomized trials and the waste in randomized trials published in a single year, and found that 220,000 people just from trials published on Cochrane Review were in trials that were a waste. So what a waste of people's time there. And a lower estimate of £726 million down the drain from poor study design. So they said that trials only should be approved if the trial team contains methodological and statistical expertise. I think I back that. The other area I would expand that into is clinical prediction models. I really don't think that clinical prediction models should be approved by ethics committees anymore unless they have an actual statistician involved. So during the COVID pandemic, there were over 600 clinical prediction models produced, most of them by clinicians, most of them without any training. There were only 6 of them, 6, that were of any value to public policy. Most of them were waste. Clinical prediction models are, in my opinion, the hardest study design to do. And yet I see repeatedly people thinking, oh yeah, I'll have a go at this. And it's shocking. 75% of them, by the way, never get published. That's some study from research from Nicole White. So a lot of them just go nowhere, possibly because people, after starting them, discover how hard they are to do. I think we need to recognise that there is a competence issue with statistical practice in Australia. People are getting the basics wrong. And that's one reason why I'm worried about committees sorting themselves out in-house, because they think, oh, this is a simple design, we can do it, but people are getting simple designs wrong all the time. So there's a sort of unknown there that people don't even realise what needs to be covered, that you think you can do this yourself, but actually you've been making this mistake now for decades and it needs to be fixed. Possibly we do need to pay all members. I know it's hard to get people to dedicate their time in here. I see Gordon Spears. So the very last slide is for a colleague who's looking for participants. This is Dorothy Bishop from Oxford, who you might have seen in the news, upholding, I would say, very strong ethical standards last week. She's doing a survey of attitudes to different approach to responding to research fraud. She's getting a lot of responses from research sleuths, and she'd really like to hear from people in the research ethics world. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Adrian. Look, nothing if not polemic as ever, and great to hear from you. I don't think anyone would disagree with your comment about research wastage. I mean, Paul Glasio has, been working, and yourself have been working on that for such a long time. Any way in which we can minimise research wastage is clearly going to benefit, Australians and everyone around the world. I mean, do you feel there's more than one way to skin a cat? Like, the issue of having a statistician on an ethics committee, and noting, as you know, that the national statement talks about 8 people. The other day we heard from a couple of people, including myself, that we need a lot more people on ethics committees. But if we were to acquiesce to all the people we need on ethics committees, consumer engagement, lived experience, you could have a cast of thousands. So in terms of skinning cats, Uni of Melbourne has the MISH Centre. Uni of Queensland has a methodology centre. Is this potentially a better way of doing it, as long as there is that capability, that methodological capability, prior to it being approved as a clinical trial?
Yeah, definitely. No, it doesn't necessarily have to be the ethics committee, and maybe, yes, separate. And people talked about, they have the separate panel because they find it more efficient to separate these things out. And I think the first speaker spoke about that as well. You have the study design looked at in detail, and then you have other experts looking at the ethics. And similarly, yeah, I know that there's another paper very similar to ours, does a very similar thing in genetics, another complicated area. I think, though, what frustrates me is people taking on really complicated methods. And in the last year or two, I've seen target trials is the latest one. Target trials are wonderful. My stars, they are really hard to do well. But because they're vogue, and because you get in the New England Journal of Medicine, people want to take them on. And the other one is machine learning. I see people dropping that in everywhere. And I see people dropping it in who don't understand a t-test. It's like, well, how are you going to do this? It's the equivalent of, you can't even take blood from a patient, and you want to go and do heart surgery. Like, we would never let that happen. But I think because of this massive disconnect between the harms of you publishing a rubbish paper that gets the results completely wrong and the impact that may happen years later on people, I don't think it is taken seriously enough. And that people are just allowed to continue to write and publish this stuff, whether it's just very flagrant.
Yeah, and I hope that everyone online who runs an HREC would take the same approach, that if you don't have the expertise to review a study, you shouldn't review it. I mean, this isn't a question of pride or hubris. It's a question of practicality. And I think, Adrian, we have university committees who maybe aren't set up to review clinical trials, whereas you have the public health ethics committees, which are under NMA, the ones that are really set up to, and of course Bilberry, set up to review these. And maybe that's where we have to focus on, at least, I guess, ensuring that either they have the statistical expertise, or they have been through the methodology center approach. I mean, and can we do it in a one, or should we focus just on clinical trials? Should we focus on all clinical research? Clearly, you know, the more qualitative research may not be in the same basket. How would you approach that?
I think the problem is pretty big. I think you can see that with the p-values. People don't understand what a p-value is. That is desperately bad. And it's not just the complicated trials. I saw one the other day, you know, where they're baked in regression to the mean. It's like, all you're going to show here is regression to the mean. Like, I can teach you what regression to the mean is in an hour. And you can avoid you making a very simple mistake. And you're going to look silly once somebody spots what it is. But unfortunately, a lot of this stuff gets published and nobody spots what it is because the journals don't have the expertise either. So I don't know, what we really need is people to slow down and do less. If there's one thing if I could wave a magic wand, that's what I would do, because it's this rushing to get papers out, either whether because you want a qualification, you know, for your medical board, or if you're a PhD student and you want this, or you're just trying to get your career going. And similarly, when people come to me after the study is done and I say, this is all wrong, you're going to have to start again, I see them still publishing it because they've put years of effort into something and it's too late by then. It's a very brave person that throws away 2 years of work.
And you know, and before I let Hudson wrap up, Adrian, I mean, your comment about small and odd HRECs was very funny, by the way. But I don't think we would disagree that some HRECs maybe just have the correct number according to the national statement. But as I say, I think that should be related to the kind of studies that or research that is approved. Clearly, more complex research needs more input. But you know, at the grant funding stage, do funding bodies have a responsibility to, you know, to deal with it at that stage? Many HREC chairs, I would imagine, probably still don't believe that a review and approval by an MRFF funding group means that merit and integrity have been reviewed. I don't believe that's the case. I feel that needs to be done somewhere else along the way. Is that responsibility of funding bodies?
No, I don't think it's their responsibility. And I do see, you know, people say, oh yeah, this has got the stamp of peer review because it's been through, you know, because they've got funding for it. You know, the funding application does not often have a detailed protocol in there. So you're funding the idea and hopefully it means it's a good idea, but people haven't looked at the nuts and bolts. I mean, I think if I had two magic wands, the other very simple thing I would do, which is how I was taught to do science a very long time ago, is that everybody should have a protocol and it should be published. You know, and you get that review and you put time into looking at that. And then also, if your protocol's published and I see your results, if you followed your protocol, I'm much more likely to, in fact, I'm far more likely to believe you. If you don't have a protocol and you've just published some results, most of the time
that's a fair point. And I think, Adrian, it speaks to the fact that you know, we have research is the continuum, and it doesn't just start at the point you get ethics approval. It starts a long time before that, and the point.